I sat in the parking lot of St. Michael's Hospital, watching my husband of 42 years walk through the automatic doors for the third time this week. He didn't know I was here. He thought I was at my quilting circle, the same quilting circle I'd been skipping for 2 months to follow him. At 64 years old, I never imagined I'd become this woman, the suspicious wife, the one who checks phone records and follows her husband's car. But 3 weeks ago, I found a prescription receipt in his coat pocket, chemotherapy medication, stage 3. And my husband, the man who promised to share everything with me, hadn't said a word. My name doesn't matter. What matters is that after 42 years of marriage, after raising 3 children, after surviving his mother's disapproval, financial ruin in 2008, and the loss of our youngest son in Afghanistan, I was apparently not trustworthy enough to know that my husband was dying. Or maybe he wasn't dying. Maybe the prescription was for someone else. A mistress, perhaps. Someone he loved enough to keep secret. Someone he was caring for while I sat at home knitting baby blankets for grandchildren who lived too far away. I watched the hospital doors for 2 hours. When he finally emerged, he looked tired. Older than his 67 years. He walked slowly to his truck, and for a moment, I saw him lean against the driver's door, his shoulders shaking. Was he crying? I wanted to run to him. I wanted to hold him and demand answers, but I stayed in my car, frozen, because I realized I didn't know this man anymore. The man I married told me everything. The man I married held my hand during bad news. This man, this stranger, was keeping secrets that could shatter our entire world. That night, I made my decision. If my husband wouldn't tell me the truth, I would find it myself. The hospital had a volunteer program. I'd seen the flyer in my doctor's office months ago, never giving it a second thought. Now, it seemed like divine intervention. I called the next morning. Yes, we're always looking for volunteers. Can you come in for orientation on Tuesday? I could. I did. And 3 days later, I was wearing a blue volunteer vest, pushing a cart of magazines through the oncology ward of St. Michael's Hospital, searching for my husband's secret. The first week, I learned the layout. The oncology ward was on the 3rd floor, a maze of treatment rooms and waiting areas. The nurses were overworked and barely glanced at volunteers. The patients were too focused on their own battles to notice an old woman with a magazine cart. I saw my husband twice that week. Both times, he walked past me without a flicker of recognition. 42 years of marriage, and he looked right through me like I was furniture. I'd changed my hair, wore glasses I didn't need, and kept my head down, but still, 42 years. You'd think he'd recognize my hands, my walk, the way I breathe. But grief and fear have a way of making us blind. I knew that better than anyone. On the 2nd week, I found her. I was restocking magazines in the 3rd floor waiting room when I heard his voice. That deep, gentle voice that used to read bedtime stories to our children, that whispered, "I love you" in the dark for 4 decades. I turned slowly, pretending to organize the magazine rack. My husband sat in a corner, holding the hand of a young woman. She couldn't have been older than 35, with dark hair and hollow cheeks. An IV port was visible on her arm. She was crying, and my husband was comforting her. "You're going to be fine," he said. "The doctors are optimistic, and I'm not going anywhere, okay? I'll be here for every treatment." I gripped the magazine cart so hard my knuckles turned white. Who was this woman? Why was my husband promising to be there for her when he couldn't even tell me he was coming to this hospital? Why was he holding her hand with the same tenderness he used to reserve for me? I wanted to scream. I wanted to throw the magazines at both of them and demand answers. But I was a volunteer, an invisible old woman in a blue vest, so I pushed my cart to the next room and tried not to fall apart. That night, I barely spoke during dinner. My husband noticed. "You okay, sweetheart? You seem quiet, just tired." The quilting circle ran late. Another lie. Our marriage was drowning in them now, and we were both too afraid to reach for a lifeline. I couldn't sleep. At 2 a.m., I crept downstairs and went through his phone while he snored upstairs. I'd never done this before, never felt the need to. But desperate times, as they say. His recent calls showed the same number over and over, no name saved, just a number with a 406 area code, Montana. The texts were worse. Treatment went well today. Feeling hopeful? I'm so proud of you. Stay strong. Dr. Morrison says the numbers are improving. This is good news. I'll always be here for you, no matter what. Love you. Love you. I sat in the dark kitchen, my husband's phone in my trembling hands, and felt my heart crack down the middle. 42 years. 3 children. 6 grandchildren. A lifetime of building something I thought was unshakable. And he was telling another woman he loved her. I put the phone back exactly where I found it. I went back to bed, and I lay there until dawn, planning my next move. The following Tuesday, I positioned myself near the 3rd floor elevator at 10 a.m. That's when my husband usually arrived. Right on schedule, the doors opened, and he stepped out, carrying a small gift bag. I followed him at a distance, past the nurse's station, past the treatment rooms, to a private room at the end of the hall. Room 312. He knocked softly and entered. I waited 5 minutes. Then I grabbed my magazine cart and rolled it to the doorway of room 312, pretending to check my list of deliveries. Through the small window, I could see my husband sitting beside the young woman's bed. She was laughing at something, he said. He reached into the gift bag and pulled out a stuffed bear wearing a tiny hospital gown. She clutched it to her chest like a child. Then she said something that stopped my heart. "Thank you, Dad." Dad. I nearly dropped the cart. I must have made a noise because my husband glanced toward the door. I ducked away, heart pounding, brain spinning. Dad. She called him Dad. But we only had 3 children. Tommy, our eldest, lived in Boston with his wife and twins. Sarah was in California, recently divorced, throwing herself into her career. And Michael died in Afghanistan 12 years ago. He was 24 years old. We didn't have a daughter. So why was this woman calling my husband Dad? I abandoned my cart in the hallway and fled to the women's restroom. I locked myself in a stall and tried to breathe. Think, I told myself. Think. Could my husband have a child I didn't know about? Before we married? During our marriage? A secret he'd kept for decades? The math didn't work. The woman was around 35. My husband and I started dating when we were 22, married at 25. If he'd fathered a child before me, I would have known. We came from the same small town in Montana. Everyone knew everything about everyone. After. It had to be after. During one of his business trips, maybe. Those long years when he traveled for work and I stayed home with the kids. Had he met someone? Started another family? The thought made me physically sick. I spent 20 minutes in that bathroom stall, alternating between rage and grief, before I could compose myself enough to leave. I needed more information. I needed to know who this woman was and how she'd ended up calling my husband Dad. Her name was Emily. I learned that from her chart, which I glimpsed during my next volunteer shift. Emily Roberts, age 34, diagnosed with ovarian cancer 6 months ago. Emergency contact, Robert Mitchell. Robert Mitchell, my husband's name. But her last name was Roberts, not Mitchell, and her emergency contact was my husband, not whoever her real father might be. I spent the next week gathering information like a detective. I listened at doors. I chatted with nurses. I befriended the receptionist with homemade cookies. What I learned broke my heart in a completely different way. Emily Roberts was the daughter of a woman named Linda Roberts. Linda had worked at my husband's company 40 years ago, back when he was just a junior accountant. She'd been a single mother, struggling to raise a baby on her own. When I asked the receptionist how she knew all this, she shrugged. Mr. Mitchell talks about it when he visits. He says Emily's like the daughter he never had. He's been supporting her since she was a teenager, paid for her college, helped her start her business, walked her down the aisle at her wedding. Walked her down the aisle. I remembered that weekend. 8 years ago. My husband had gone to Montana for a college reunion. He'd come back quieter than usual, emotional. I'd assumed he was feeling nostalgic, missing his youth. He'd been at a wedding, walking a young woman down the aisle, a woman I'd never heard of. But why keep her secret from me? The answer came from the most unexpected source. I was in the hospital cafeteria, eating a sad turkey sandwich, when a woman sat down across from me. She was about my age, with silver hair and kind eyes. "You're Robert's wife, aren't you?" I nearly choked. "Excuse me?" She smiled. I'm Linda, Emily's mother. I saw your name tag, and I recognized you from the photos Robert keeps in his office. You look different with the glasses, but I'd know that face anywhere. I didn't know what to say. 42 years of secrets were unraveling in a hospital cafeteria, and I was holding a turkey sandwich like a shield. I need to tell you something, Linda said. Something Robert should have told you 40 years ago. She took a deep breath. Emily is Robert's biological daughter, but not in the way you're thinking. I just stared at her. 41 years ago, I was young, single, and desperate. I wanted a baby more than anything, but I wasn't in a relationship. I asked Robert for help. We were friends, just friends, and he was engaged to you, and I knew he'd make a wonderful father. So I asked him to donate, to help me conceive. She paused, watching my face. He said yes, but he also said he couldn't keep it from you. He promised he would tell you before the wedding. I gave him time, and more time, and more time, but he never did. He never told me. I know. And I'm so sorry. I should have reached out to you myself, but Robert begged me not to. He said he'd handle it. He kept saying he'd find the right moment. But there's never a right moment for a confession that big, is there? I set down my sandwich. My hands were shaking. So, Emily. Emily is my husband's daughter? Biologically, yes, but he never wanted to be her father. That was my choice, my plan. He was just helping a friend. Linda's eyes filled with tears. But he's been helping ever since. When Emily was 14, my husband died and left us with nothing. Robert paid for her school, her braces, her college. When she got sick, he insisted on paying for the best treatment. He visits her every day because she's scared and alone, and her own husband couldn't handle the diagnosis and left her. My husband's not having an affair. He's been caring for a daughter I never knew existed. A daughter he's been supporting for 40 years without ever telling me. I didn't know whether to scream or cry or laugh. I need to talk to him, I said. Yes, you do. Linda reached across the table and squeezed my hand. I'm sorry I kept this secret too. I should have told you years ago. But Robert was so afraid of losing you. He loves you more than anything in this world. I've never seen a man love a woman the way he loves you. Then why didn't he tell me? Because sometimes the people who love us most are the ones who are most afraid of disappointing us. I found my husband in Emily's room an hour later. He was reading to her from a book, something about a detective and a mysterious mansion. Emily was asleep, her monitors beeping steadily, the stuffed bear tucked under her arm. I stood in the doorway, still wearing my volunteer vest, and waited. He looked up. His eyes found mine, and for a moment, nothing happened. Then recognition dawned. His face went white. Margaret? I stepped into the room and closed the door behind me. Hello, Robert. What are you? How did you? He stood up, nearly knocking over his chair. You're supposed to be at Quilting Circle, and you're supposed to be at the hardware store. I crossed my arms. Seems like we're both liars. I can explain. Can you? Can you explain why you've been coming to this hospital for months without telling me? Can you explain who Emily is? Can you explain the 41 years of secrets? His face crumpled. I know, Linda told me. My husband, my strong, steady husband, sank back into his chair and covered his face with his hands. I was going to tell you. So many times. But it was never the right moment. And then years passed, and Emily was doing fine, and I thought maybe it didn't matter anymore. Then she got sick. And I couldn't abandon her, but I couldn't tell you either because then you'd know I'd been lying our entire marriage. He looked up at me with red eyes. I was so scared of losing you, Margaret. I've been scared every single day for 41 years. I looked at him. At this man I'd built a life with. This man who'd held me when our son died, who'd worked 2 jobs during the recession so I could stay home with the kids, who'd never missed an anniversary or a birthday or a random Tuesday when I needed him. This man who had a daughter I never knew about. Why didn't you just tell me before we got married? I asked. I would have understood. A donation isn't a betrayal. I know that now. But I was 25 and stupid and terrified. I thought you'd leave me. I thought you'd think I was some kind of... I don't know. I wasn't thinking clearly. I'd made a promise to Linda and then I made a promise to you and I didn't know how to keep both. So you chose to lie instead. Yes. He hung his head. And I've regretted it every day since. I walked to Emily's bedside. She was still sleeping, her face peaceful despite the poison coursing through her veins. She looked nothing like my husband, I realized. She must take after her mother. But when I looked closer, I saw it. The shape of her eyebrows, the slight dimple in her chin, these small pieces of the man I loved, living in a woman I'd never met. Does she know? I asked. That you never told me? Yes. He stood and came to stand beside me. She's been begging me to tell you for years. She said it wasn't fair to either of us. She said she wanted to meet you, get to know you, but I kept putting it off. There was always an excuse. I watched Emily sleep for a long moment. She has your eyebrows. My husband made a sound that was half laugh, half sob. She has my stubbornness too, and my terrible sense of direction. I turned to face him. 41 years, Robert. You kept this from me for 41 years. Do you have any idea how that feels? Do you have any idea what I've been imagining for the past 2 months? I thought you were dying. I thought you were having an affair. I thought our entire marriage was a lie. I'm sorry. The words sounded hollow, and I could see on his face that he knew it. I'm so sorry, Margaret. I don't deserve your forgiveness. I know that. No, you don't. He flinched like I'd hit him. But here's the thing, I continued. I've known you for 44 years. I've been married to you for 42. I know when you're lying and when you're telling the truth. And right now, standing in this hospital room with your secret daughter, I can see that you're telling the truth. You were scared. You made a terrible decision when you were young and stupid, and then you were too afraid to fix it. I took a deep breath. That's not an excuse. That's just an explanation. What does that mean? He asked quietly. It means I need time, Robert. I need to process this. I need to be angry and hurt and confused without you trying to fix it or explain it away. Can you give me that? He nodded slowly. I can give you anything. Everything. Whatever you need. Good. I took off my volunteer vest and set it on the chair. Then you can start by introducing me to your daughter. Robert's eyes widened. What? When she wakes up, I'd like to meet her properly. Without the disguise and the lies and the secrets. He stared at me like I'd just sprouted wings. You'd do that? She's your daughter, Robert. She's been your daughter for 34 years. She's sick and scared, and apparently her husband left her when she needed him most. The least I can do is introduce myself. Margaret. He started to cry. Really cry, tears streaming down his weathered face. I don't deserve you. No, I agreed. You don't. But you're stuck with me anyway. That's what 42 years of marriage means. He pulled me into a hug so tight I could barely breathe. I let him hold me, let myself sink into the familiar warmth of his arms, even as my heart was still churning with anger and grief and confusion. We stayed like that until Emily stirred. Dad? Her voice was groggy. Who's? She looked at me, then at her father, then back at me. Her eyes widened. Is she Emily? My husband said, his voice thick. I'd like you to meet my wife, Margaret. Well. I stepped forward and took Emily's hand. I understand you've wanted to meet me for a while, I said. I'm sorry it took so long. I'm sorry about a lot of things, but I'm here now. Emily started to cry. I'm so sorry. I never meant to cause problems between you. I told him to tell you. I told him so many times. Shh. I squeezed her hand. We're going to figure this out, but right now, you need to focus on getting better. Everything else can wait. She looked at me with something like hope. You're not angry? At me? At you? No, sweetheart. You didn't do anything wrong. You were just a baby when all this started. The adults in this situation are the ones who made the mess. You just got caught in it. I looked at my husband. We all got caught in it. The next few weeks were some of the hardest of my life, and also some of the best. I moved into the guest room for a while. I needed space to process, to grieve the marriage I thought I had, to rebuild something new on the ashes of 41 years of secrets. But I also spent time at the hospital. With Emily. She was remarkable. This daughter my husband had kept hidden. Funny, kind, resilient in the face of a disease that was trying to kill her. She told me about her childhood, growing up knowing that her father was a generous stranger who sent birthday cards and Christmas presents and college tuition checks. She told me about the day she finally met him, when she was 14 and her world was falling apart. And this man she'd only heard about in stories showed up and promised to help. She told me about her wedding, how nervous she'd been, how her husband-to-be had no family, and neither did she, really, except for Robert. How he'd walked her down the aisle and given a speech that made everyone cry, how it was the happiest day of her life. She told me about her divorce, 3 months after her diagnosis, when her husband decided he'd signed up for better, not worse. How Robert had shown up the next day with moving boxes and a lawyer's number and the promise that she would never face this alone. "Your father is a good man," I told her one afternoon. She was feeling better after a round of chemo, sitting up in bed, color returning to her cheeks. "He's the best man I know," she said, "except for the part where he lied to you for 40 years. That was pretty bad." I laughed despite myself. "Yeah, that was pretty bad." Emily reached for my hand. "I'm glad you know now," she said. "I'm glad I don't have to be a secret anymore. It was hard, you know, loving someone who's ashamed of you." "He wasn't ashamed of you," I said gently. "He was ashamed of himself. There's a difference, is there?" I thought about it. "Yes," I said finally. "When you're ashamed of someone else, you hide them to protect yourself. When you're ashamed of yourself, you hide the truth to protect them." Robert wasn't trying to protect himself all these years. He was trying to protect me from knowing he'd failed me. "That's still not okay," Emily said. "No, it's not. But it helps me understand." The cancer responded to treatment. Slowly, painfully, but it responded. By the 3rd month, Emily's doctor was using words like remission and optimistic and long-term survival. By the 4th month, I moved back into the master bedroom. Not because I'd forgiven Robert completely, not because the hurt had healed, but because I realized something important during all those hours at Emily's bedside. Life is too short for guest rooms. We had a lot of hard conversations, Robert and I. Some of them ended in tears. Some of them ended in shouting. Once, I threw a pillow at his head and told him he was the most infuriating man I'd ever met. But we kept talking. We kept showing up. We kept choosing each other, even when it hurt. And slowly, something new began to grow in the space where the secrets used to live. 6 months after I first followed my husband to St. Michael's Hospital, our family gathered in our backyard for a celebration. Not a big one. Just our children and grandchildren, Linda and Emily, finally healthy enough to leave the hospital. I watched my husband flip burgers at the grill, our eldest son Tommy by his side, both of them arguing about the proper technique for a medium-rare patty. I watched Sarah pushing her daughter on the old swing set, the same one Michael used to play on before he went off to war and never came back. I watched Emily sitting in a lawn chair, Linda beside her, both of them laughing at something on Emily's phone. This was my family now, bigger than it used to be, more complicated, held together by secrets that had finally been told and wounds that were slowly healing. Robert caught my eye across the yard and smiled. That same smile I'd fallen in love with 44 years ago, when we were young and stupid and didn't know anything about the weight of the promises we were making. I smiled back. Later that night, after everyone had gone home and Robert was washing dishes in the kitchen, I found a small box on my pillow. Inside was a necklace, simple and elegant, with a pendant shaped like a tree. 5 branches extended from the trunk, each one ending in a small gemstone. I brought it to the kitchen, where Robert stood elbow-deep in soapy water. "What's this?" He dried his hands and came to stand beside me. "It's a family tree." He pointed to each gem. "Tommy, Sarah, Michael, Emily. And this one, in the center, bigger than the rest, that's you." "Me?" "You're the heart of this family, Margaret. You've always been. Even when I was keeping secrets and making messes, you were the one holding everything together." He took the necklace and fastened it around my neck. "I don't deserve you," he said again. It had become a refrain over the past 6 months, almost a joke between us. "I know," I replied, the same way I always did. "But you're stuck with me anyway." He kissed me softly. "That's not being stuck," he said. "That's being blessed." I'm not going to pretend our story has a perfect ending. We're still figuring things out, Robert and I. There are still hard days, days when the betrayal feels fresh and the anger flares up, and I wonder if I made the right choice by staying. But then I see him with Emily, patient and devoted, making up for 41 years of distance. I see him with our grandchildren, teaching them to fish and ride bikes and believe in themselves. I see him looking at me across the dinner table, still amazed after all these years that I chose him. And I remember what I learned during those months of playing detective. Love isn't about never making mistakes. It's about what you do after the mistakes are made. My husband made a terrible mistake 41 years ago. He compounded it with decades of lies. But underneath all that fear and shame was a man who was trying, in his broken way, to do right by everyone he loved. He failed, spectacularly, but he never stopped trying. And maybe that's what marriage is, in the end. Two imperfect people who keep trying, keep showing up, keep choosing each other even when it's hard. Especially when it's hard. Last week, Emily came to visit. She's been in remission for 3 months now, healthy and hopeful, and planning a future she wasn't sure she'd have. She brought her mother in a homemade pie and a card that made me cry. To my bonus mom, it said, "Thank you for letting me be part of your family. I'm not her mother. I'll never be her mother. But I can be something, some kind of bridge between who she is and who she's becoming. That's enough." Robert found me on the porch that evening, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and pink. "What are you thinking about?" he asked, settling into the chair beside me. "I'm thinking about secrets," I said, "and how heavy they are to carry." He was quiet for a moment. "I'm sorry I made you carry mine." "I know." I reached for his hand. But maybe that's the thing about secrets. They're only heavy when you carry them alone. Once you share them, they get lighter. Is that forgiveness? I considered the question. "It's a start," I said. "Ask me again in 40 years. He laughed, that deep, genuine laugh I'd loved since I was 22 years old. "It's a date," he said. And we sat there together, watching the stars come out, two imperfect people who'd somehow found their way back to each other. Not because we were special, not because we had all the answers, but because we'd chosen every day for 42 years to keep trying. That's not nothing. Actually, I think it's everything.